Hi, welcome to Dig into China. I'm Dong Sheng. Allow me to share a political issue and event in China that has garnered widespread discussion both domestically and internationally. Within China, netizens discuss it with subtlety, whereas abroad, the conversations are more forthright. The global discourse has largely centered on the severe flooding in southern China. However, Xi Jinping's response has been disheartening. Some Chinese netizens in their veiled remarks suggest that he no longer even puts on a show of concern. Let us explore and analyze this issue in greater depth. Recently, several provinces in southern China have been ravaged by torrential rains, resulting in severe flooding. Entire villages have been submerged, and countless residents are desperately trying to salvage their valuable belongings to mitigate their losses, while hoping for government assistance. In Guilin, delayed flood warnings have caused significant economic damage to the community. In Fujian province, a family tragically lost their lives in the overwhelming floodwaters. The Chinese government has been hesitant to report the sudden floods accurately or devote much coverage to the disaster. Nonetheless, in this age of digital information, the severe floods in Guangxi and Guangdong and their consequent hardships, along with the loss of lives and property, they have garnered significant attention and widespread discussion throughout Chinese society. So, why did the netizens bring Chairman Xi Jinping into discussions about this flood? Chinese netizens were astonished to discover that shortly after the severe flooding in the south, Chairman Xi promptly left Beijing. Did he head to the disaster areas? No, he went in the opposite direction to Qinghai province. Some Chinese netizens humorously commented that Xi's visit to Qinghai, known for its Tibetan Buddhism, might involve inviting a living Buddha to pray for the support disaster relief efforts, a tongue-in-cheek suggestion. On a different note, there were sarcastic remarks suggesting President Xi's visit aimed at integrating these living Buddhas into the Communist Party and educating them. Additionally, some speculated that his choice of Qinghai was to avoid a disaster given its high altitude and terrain, rather than seeking spiritual intervention. Chinese netizens employ political satire to express their discontent. Some discussions among them contrast current practice with past leadership, noting how former Premier Wen Jiabao, for instance, was famously seen at the disaster sites writing on small blackboards with a message like, "In times of hardship, the nation thrives," which some viewed as a staged theatrics. While such gesture can help stabilize public morale and unify efforts, it's noted that Chairman Xi Jinping tends to avoid disaster areas. For instance, during last year's floods in Hebei near Beijing, he chose to travel to the northeast instead. Similarly, when disaster struck the northeast, he was in Hainan in the south. This reflects President Xi's prioritization of personal safety and security. Overseas commentators' criticisms are pointed. They argue that Xi Jinping is neglecting state affairs, emphasizing that the leadership entails prioritizing the welfare of the people. Comparisons are drawn to historical Chinese emperors who showed deep concern for both the nation and its citizens. They question why Chairman Xi would choose to vacation in the highlands while ordinary people are submerged in floods. These critics accuse him of being disengaged and indifferent to his governance responsibilities. Here are my takeaways. Firstly, suggesting that Chairman Xi Jinping is simply distracted may be an overly charitable interpretation. It's more reflective of his core beliefs and intentions. Implicitly, it seems President Xi's priorities have never truly centered on the people's hardships, but rather on maintaining and wielding power. Hence, when people find themselves submerged in water, Chairman Xi seeks refuge in high places, which aligns more closely with his fundamental motivations. Xi Jinping prioritized his personal safety because it secures his power and lifelong rule. Therefore, whenever disasters occur, he tends to avoid the affected areas. Describing him as distracted or neglecting governance is misleading because his focus has always been on maintaining power and authoritarian control rather than addressing the suffering of the people. Thus, the notion of him being absent-minded is inaccurate. In reality, he remains steadfast in pursuing his original goals and ensuring the preservation of his authority. Secondly, some netizens may question what is more crucial at present, Chairman Xi Jinping's visit to Qinghai for tourism or prioritizing assistance to the flood-affected victims in the south to minimize their losses. From Xi Jinping's perspective, his trips to Qinghai holds greater importance than immediate attention to the southern floods. This is because his visit to Qinghai is aimed at addressing issues related to the collective consciousness and educational reforms within the Chinese nation. During his recent trip to Qinghai, Xi Jinping's primary objective was to communicate important messages within the CCP. According to Xinhua News Agency, Xi Jinping visited Guoluo Xining Democracy Middle School and Hongjue Temple in Xining City. His visit focused on understanding local efforts to advance education, promote East-West cooperation, implementing paired assistance programs, and strengthen collective consciousness education among the Chinese people. Additionally, he emphasized the promotion of patriotic and religious traditions within the Tibetan Buddhist community to foster national unity and progress. According to Xinhua News Agency, Xi Jinping's recent visit to Qinghai emphasized the importance of fostering a strong collective consciousness among the Chinese nation. This focus is highlighted across various CCP media outlets, reflecting Xi's long-standing emphasis on this theme during his visits to ethnic minority areas and in his speeches addressing ethnic issues. Xinhua News Agency further clarifies that this concept is not a new slogan but a recurring theme in Xi's leadership. In June 2023, during his visit to Inner Mongolia, Xi Jinping stressed the significance of fostering a strong collective consciousness among the Chinese people. He underscores this as the principal theme of the party's ethnic policies in the current era and a key focus of initiatives across ethnic regions. Similarly, during the Politburo's 9th collective study session in October 2023, Xi Jinping reaffirmed the importance of reinforcing the collective consciousness of the Chinese nation. Xinhua News Agency traces back to May 2014 when Xi Jinping first introduced the concept of the collective consciousness of the Chinese nation during the second Xinjiang Work Symposium. This underscores Xi Jinping's significant satisfaction and emphasis on this concept. In October 2017, he included it in the report of the 19th National Congress of the CCP and incorporated it into the party's constitution. Xinhua News Agency highlights these points to illustrate Xi Jinping's dedicated efforts and attention to detail in promoting and embedding this concept, demonstrating his deliberate and strategic approach. According to Xi Jinping, the collective consciousness of the Chinese nation is fundamental to his leadership. Without the unity under the CCP leadership and ideological cohesion, his rule's stability would be at risk. Therefore, in comparison to the imperative of strengthening this national collective consciousness, even if millions in southern China are affected by flooding, their situation is seen as secondary. This perspective explains why Xi Jinping prioritizes visits like the one to Qinghai as strategically important. Thirdly, it's not entirely accurate to say Xi Jinping avoids visiting disaster areas. When disasters occur, he not only refrains from visiting but also stays at a distance from them. For instance, during floods in Hebei, staying in Beijing was considered risky, prompting him to consider leaving the capital. Similarly, when flood hits Guangdong and Guangxi during their peak seasons, Xi Jinping opted to visit higher altitude regions. During severe flooding in Henan, he traveled to Tibet for safety, and during recent heavy rains in Guangdong, albeit less severe, he sought refuge in Qinghai, a higher altitude region. Thus, Xi Jinping's response to disasters involves not just avoiding affected areas, but also relocating to safer places. The second observation is that it would be inaccurate to say Xi Jinping never visits disaster areas. After the immediate crisis subsides and post-disaster reconstruction begin, Chairman Xi invariably makes a point to visit these areas. During these visits, he addressed the affected populations, conveying his concerns and empathy, emphasizing that he has been deeply troubled by their suffering. However, initially he tends to stay away from disaster zones and waits until the situation stabilizes before making these visits. This pattern reflects his approach of waiting for the storm to pass and then, often clad in his trademark black jacket and leather shoes, appearing in the disaster area to capture media attention. Therefore, it's not correct to assert that he avoids disaster areas altogether. Rather, his visits typically occur after the immediate crisis has subsided. Fourthly, Chinese netizens remain outspoken despite Xi Jinping's more than a decade in power and his consistent practice of avoiding immediate visits to disaster areas, opting instead to keep a distance. One might expect this approach to become normalized over time. However, each time a disaster strikes, Chinese netizens continue to criticize Xi Jinping for this pattern of avoiding disaster zones. This reflects a political reality. As of today, the Chinese public has not embraced Xi Jinping's method of addressing disasters. It's possible that the people underestimated this phenomenon, but it's actually a major political issue. Many refuse to endorse Xi Jinping's new rules and behaviors. They simply don't accept his approach. This situation reflects the true level of trust Xi Jinping currently commands among the Chinese public, which is increasingly distant from the idealized image of people's leader he envisions for himself. To this day, Chinese society through this issue demonstrates its lack of approval for Xi Jinping. This disapproval extends beyond just overseas critics or democratic activists. It's widespread among the general public in China, especially among the educated and elite classes. There is a strong discontent with Xi Jinping's conduct, seeing actions like seeking refuge in Tibet or Qinghai during floods as arrogant and out of touch. This widespread non-acceptance represents a significant political reality and poses Xi Jinping's biggest governance challenge. Yet, Xi Jinping seems steadfast in his approach. Fifthly, Xi Jinping appears unwilling or hesitant to engage in activities that would bring him closer to the people, particularly during significant disasters. While offering comfort and empathy could easily bridge this gap, Xi Jinping seems reluctant to connect personally with ordinary citizens. His perspective seems rooted in a sense of lineage and heritage, being from a prestigious family with deep ties to the party's history, including his father's high-ranking role during Mao Zedong's era. This background may influence his belief that ordinary people cannot relate to him as equals. This underlying rationale shapes Xi Jinping's reluctance to engage closely with the populace. Despite verbally emphasizing the importance of the people and the nation being intertwined, his actions during crisis can be seen as contradicting this sentiment, thereby exposing him to accusations of hypocrisy. The general public feels that Xi Jinping lacks awareness of their hardships and is unwilling to emphasize to endure hardships alongside them. He appears more interested in receiving adulation and praise from the people. Thus, each time a disaster occurs, Xi Jinping's reaction reinforces to the Chinese people his hypocrisy and a disregard for their concerns. Thank you for watching. Please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button right here. I'll see you again shortly. Until then, be well.